The Broad Highway by Geoffrey Farnell. Book 2, Chapter 31, in which the Ancient is surprised. A cheery place at all times is the kitchen of an English inn, a comfortable place to eat in, to talk in, or to doze in, a place with which your parlours and withdrawing-rooms, your salons, à la the 3 Louis, with their irritating rococo, their gilt and satin and spindle-legged discomforts, are not, to my mind, worthy to compare. And what inn-kitchen in all broad England was ever brighter, neater, and more comfortable than this kitchen of the Bull, where sweet Prue held supreme sway, with such grave dignity, and with her 2 white-capped maids to do her bidding and behests? Surely none. And surely in no inn, tavern, or hostelry soever, great or small, was there ever seen a daintier, prettier, sweeter hostess than this same Prue of ours. And her presence was reflected everywhere, and if ever the kitchen of an inn possessed a heart to lose, then beyond all doubt this kitchen had lost its heart to Prue long since. Even the battered cutlasses crossed upon the wall, the ponderous jack above the hearth, with its legend, Anno Domini 1643, took on a brighter sheen to greet her when she came, and as for the pots and pans, they fairly twinkled. But to-day Prue's eyes were red, and her lips were all a-droop, the which, though her smile was brave and ready, the Ancient was quick to notice. "Why, Prue, lass, you've been weepin'." "Yes, grandfer." "Your pretty eyes be all swole, red they be. What's the trouble?" "Oh, 'tis nothing, dear. 'Tis just a maid's foolishness. Never mind me, dear." "Ah, but I love 'ee, Prue. Come, kiss me. There now, tell me all about it. All about it, Prue." "Oh, grandfer," said she from the hollow of his shoulder, "'tis just Jarge." The old man grew very still. His mouth opened slowly, and closed with a snap. Did he say Jarge, Prue? Is it breaking your 'art ye be for that dear poachin' Black Jarge? To think as my Prue should come down to a poachin'—" Prudence slipped from his encircling arm, and stood up very straight and proud. There were tears thick upon her lashes, but she did not attempt to wipe them away. "Grandfer," she said very gently, "you mustn't speak of Jarge to me like that. Ye mustn't. Ye mustn't, because I love him, and if he ever comes back, I'll marry him, if you will only ax me. And if he never comes back, then I think I shall die." The Ancient took out his snuff-box, knocked it, opened it, glanced inside, and shut it up again. "Did 'ee tell me as you love Black Jarge, Prue?" "Yes, grandfer, I always have, and always shall." "Loves Black Jarge," he repeated. "Allus has, allus will. Oh, Lord, what have I done?" Now, very slowly, a tear crept down his wrinkled cheek, at sight of which Prue gave a little cry, and, kneeling beside his chair, took him in her arms. "Oh, my lass, my little Prue, 'tis all my doin'. I thought—oh, Prue, 'twere me as parted you. I thought—" The quivering voice broke off. "'Tis all right, grandfer, never think of it. See there, I be smilin'," and she kissed him many times. "A danged fool I be," said the old man, shaking his head. "No, no, grandfer." "That's what I be, Prue, a danged fool. If I do go afore that theer old rusty stapil, 'twill serve me right. A danged fool I be. Allus loved him, allus will, and wishful to wed with him. Why, then," said the Ancient, swallowing 2 or 3 times, "so 'e shall, my sweet, so 'e shall, sure as sure. So come and kiss me, and forgive the old man as loves 'ee so." "What do 'ee mean, grandfer?" said Prue between 2 kisses. A fine, strappin' chap be Jarge. After all, Peter, you bean't a patch on Jarge for looks, be you?" "No, indeed, Ancient." "Wishful to wed him, she is, and so she shall. Lordy Lord! Kiss me again, Prue, for I be goin' to see Squire. Ay, I be goin' to up and speak wi' Squire for Jarge, and Peter be comin' too." "Oh, Mr. Peter!" faltered Prudence. "Be this true?" And in her eyes was the light of a sudden hope. "Yes," I nodded. "D'ye think Squire'll see you, listen to you?" she cried breathlessly. "I think he will, Prudence," said I. "God bless you, Mr. Peter," she murmured. "God bless you." But now came the sound of wheels and the voice of Simon, calling, wherefore I took my hat and followed the Ancient to the door, but there Prudence stopped me. "Last time you met with Jarge he tried to kill you." "Oh, I know, and now you be goin' to—" "Nonsense, Prue," said I. But as I spoke she stooped and would have kissed my hand, but I raised her and kissed her upon the cheek instead. "For good luck, Prue," said I, and so turned and left her. In the porch sat Job, with old Amos and the rest, still in solemn conclave over pipes and ale, who watched with gloomy brows as I swung myself up beside the Ancient in the cart. "A fool's journey," remarked old Amos sententiously, with a wave of his pipe. "A fool's journey." The Ancient cast an observing eye up at the cloudless sky, and also nodded solemnly. "There be some fools in this world, Peter, as mixes up rabbits with partridges, and honest men, like Jarge, with thieves, and lazy wagabones, like Job. But we'll show 'em, Peter, we'll show 'em, dang 'em! Drive on, Simon, my boy." So with this Parthian shot, feathered with the one strong word the Ancient kept for such occasions, we drove away from the silenced group, who stared mutely after us until we were lost to view. But the last thing I saw was the light in Prue's sweet eyes as she watched us from the open lattice. Chapter 32. How we set out for Burnham Hall. "Peter," said the Ancient after we had gone a little way, "Peter, I do 'opes as you aren't been and gone and rose my Prue's 'opes only to dash 'em down again." "I can but do my best, Ancient." "Old Un," said Simon, "'tweren't Peter as rose her hopes, 'twere you. Peter never said naught about bringin' Jarge 'ome." "Simon," commanded the Ancient, "hold thy tongue, lad. I says again, if Peter's been and rose Prue's 'opes only to dash 'em, 'twill be a bad day for Prue, you mark my words. Prue's a lass as don't love easy, and don't forget easy." "Why, true, Gaffer, true, God bless her." "She'd be one as 'ud pine, slow and quiet, like a flower in the woods, or a leaf in autumn. Ah, fade she would, fade and fade." "Well, she bain't a-goin' to do no fadin', please the Lord." "Not if me and Peter and you can 'elp it, Simon, my boy. But we'm but poor worms after all, as the Bible says, and if Peter 'as been and rose her hopes of freein' Jarge, and don't free Jarge, if Jarge should 'ave to go a convict to Australia, or to the other place, why then she'll fade as ever was, and be laid in the churchyard afore her poor old grandfather." "Lord, Old Un!" exclaimed Simon, "who's a talkin' of fadin's and churchyards? I don't like it. Let's talk o' summat else." "Simon," said the Ancient, shaking his head reprovingly, "ye be a good boy, a steady, dutiful lad ye be, I don't deny it. But the Lord aren't give ye no imagination, which, after all, you should be main thankful for, and imagination's a troublesome thing, aren't it, Peter?" "It is," said I, "a damnable thing." "Ay, many's the man as 'a been ruinated by 'is imagination. There was one, Nicodemus Blyte were 'is name." "And a very miserable cove 'e sounds, too," added Simon. "But a very decent, civil spoke, quiet young chap 'e were," continued the Ancient. "Only for 'is imagination, Lord. 'E were that full of imagination 'e couldn't drink 'is ale like an ordinary chap. Sip, 'e'd go, and sip, sip, till 'twere all gone, and then 'e'd forget as ever 'e'd 'ad any, and go away without payin' for it, if some un didn't remind 'im." "'E were no fool, Old Un," nodded Simon. "And that weren't all, neither, not by no manner o' means," the Ancient continued. "I've knowed that theer chap sit and listen to a pretty lass by the hour together, and never say a word, not one." "Didn't get a chance to, p'r'aps?" said Simon. "It weren't that. No, it were just 'is imagination a workin' and workin' inside of 'im, and fillin' 'im up. 'Ows'ever, at last, one day, he up and axed 'er to marry 'im, and she, bein' all took by surprise, said yes, and went and married some one else." "Lord!" said Simon, "what did she go and marry another chap for?" "Simon," returned the Ancient, "don't go askin' foolish questions. Hows'ever, she did, and poor Nicodemus growed more imaginative than ever. After that, he took to turnips." "Turnips!" exclaimed Simon, staring. "Turnips as ever was," nodded the Ancient. "Used to stand for hours at a time a lookin' at 'is turnips, and shakin' 'is head over 'em." "But what for? A man must be a danged fool to go shakin' of 'is 'ead over a lot o' turnips." "Well, I don't know," rejoined the Ancient. "'Is turnips was very good uns, as a rule, and fetched top prices in the markets." At this juncture there appeared a man in a cart ahead of us, who flourished his whip and roared a greeting, a coarse-visaged, loud-voiced fellow, whose beefy face was adorned with a pair of enormous fiery whiskers that seemed forever striving to hide his ears, which last, being very large and red, stood boldly out at right angles to his head, refusing to be thus ambushed, and scorning all concealment. "What, be that the Old Un? Be you alive and kickin' yet?" "Ay, God be thanked, John." "An' what be all this I 'ear about that theer Black Jarge? 'E never were much good. But what be all this?" "Lies, mostly, you may take your oath," nodded the Ancient. "But 'e've been took for poachin', an' locked up at the 'All." "An' we'm goin' to fetch un. We be goin' to see Squire." "What! You, Old Un? You see Squire? Haw! haw!" "Ah, me, and Peter, and Simon 'ere. Why not?" "You see 'is Worship Sir Peregrine Beverley, Baronet and Justice o' the Peace? You? Ecod, that's a good un, danged if it ain't! An' what might you be wishful to do when you see 'im? Which you won't?" "Fetch back Jarge, o' course." "Old Un, you must be crazed in your head, after George killin' 4 keepers, Sir Peregrine's own keepers too, shootin' 'em stone dead, and 3 more a dyin'." "John," said the Ancient, shaking his head, "that's the worst o' bein' cursed with ears like yourn." "My ears is all right," returned John, frowning. "Oh, ah!" chuckled the old man. "Your ears is all right, John, prize ears, you might call 'em. I never see'd a pair better growed. Never, no." "A bit large they may be," growled John, giving a furtive pull to the nearest ambush, "but—" "Large as ever was, John," nodded the Ancient, "uncommon large, an' consequent they ketches a lot too much. I've kep' my eye on them ears o' yourn for 30 years an' more, John. If so be as they grows any bigger, you'll be 'earin' things afore they're spoke, an'—" John gave a fierce tug to the ambush, muttered an oath, and, lashing up his horse, disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. "'Twere nigh on 4 year ago since Black Jarge thrashed John, warn't it, Simon?" "Ah!" nodded Simon. "John were in the ring then, Peter, an' a pretty tough chap 'e were too, though a bit too fond o' swingin' wi' 'is right, to please me." "'E were very sweet on Prue then, weren't 'e, Simon?" "Ah!" nodded Simon again. "'E were allus hangin' round the bull, till I warned 'im off. "An' 'e laughed at 'ee, Simon." "Ah, 'e did that, an' I were goin' to have a go at 'im myself, an' the chances are 'e'd have beat me, seein' I 'adn't been inside of a ring for 10 year when—" "Up comes Jarge," chuckled the Ancient. "What's all this?" say Jarge. "I be goin' to teach John here to keep away from my Prue," says Simon. "No, no," says Jarge, "John's young, an' you bean't the man you was 10 years ago. Let me," says Jarge. "You," says John, "you get back to your bellers, you be pretty big, but I've beat the 'eads off better men nor you." "Why then, have a try at mine," says Jarge, and with the word, bang comes John's fist agin his jaw, and they was at it. Oh, Peter, that were a fight! I seed a few in my time, but nothin' like that 'ere. "An' when 'twere all over," added Simon, "Jarge went back to his 'ammer and bellers, and we picked John up, an' I druv him home in this 'ere very cart, an' nobody's cared to stand up to Jarge since." "You have both seen Black George fight, then?" I inquired. "Many's the time, Peter." "And have you ever seen him knocked down?" "No," returned the Ancient, shaking his head. "I've seen 'im all blood from head to foot, an' once a gert big sailor man knocked 'im sideways, after which Jarge got up fur'us like and put 'im to sleep." "No, Peter," added Simon, "I don't think as there be a man in all England as could knock Black Jarge off his pins in a fair stand up fight." Said I. "Ye see, 'e be that 'ard, Peter," nodded the Ancient. "Why, look!" he cried. "Looky theer!" Now, looking where he pointed, I saw a man dart across the road some distance away. He was hidden almost immediately, for there were many trees thereabouts, but there was no mistaking that length of limb and breadth of shoulder. "'Twere Black Jarge's self!" exclaimed Simon, whipping up his horses. But when we reached the place George was gone, and though we called and sought for some time, we saw him no more. So in a while we turned and jogged back toward Sissinghurst. "What be you a shaking your head over, Old Un?" inquired Simon, after we had ridden some distance. "I were wonderin' what that old fool Amos'll say when we drive back without Jarge." Being come to the parting of the ways, I descended from the cart, for my head was strangely heavy, and I felt much out of sorts. And though the day was still young, I had no mind for work. Therefore I bade adieu to Simon and the Ancient, and turned aside towards the hollow, leaving them staring after me in wonderment. End of Book 2, Chapter 32. Read by Laurieann Walden.